Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I thought we'd do something different. We're going to look at I think we can call it a vintage RC car. Vintage, well, classic perhaps. So this is a Losi XX CR. So the original XX came out in, I think it was 1994. So to be fair, that is 30 years ago. And the CR was like the first big evolution of the XX platform. So the XX replaced the older buggy, which used to have like a trailing arm design, into a much more sort of updated and modern design as it was. And you know, this is the result of those efforts. So this one here, I got it brand new. I would think it was somewhere around 96 to 1998. I can't remember exactly when it was. And it was my main racing buggy. I actually had a second-hand one of these to begin with. But the previous owner hadn't perhaps looked after it the best, so I eventually traded that in and bought a brand new one. So back in the day these came as a kit, so you had some really good instructions. I know everybody raves about the Tamiya instructions, but actually the Losi instructions were pretty good as well. And you assemble it, it comes with no electronics, and you had to provide all of those as well. So we're looking a little bit perhaps battered on the bodywork, or at least the paintwork. You'll notice we've got quite a few colours here. So you can see we've got some metallic red, and that would be the original paint. Unfortunately it was probably the wrong paint I used and it started chipping off. So I then sprayed it with some other red paint I had, and then years later more paints chipped off and I sprayed it with yellow. Unfortunately the masking effort was pretty poor and I sprayed it yellow, so I've got some on the windows. But you can see the body shell's held up reasonably well. Should have a body clip here, although most people didn't bother. We just put Velcro down the sides. The wing's a bit battered as well. That does pop out, but it's kind of bent now, and you'd normally have a bit of plastic that went over here for the top mount as well. But generally, whenever you crashed, it would end up breaking those. So that is long since gone. So yeah, this is a two-wheel drive buggy. As you can see, we've got aluminium motor mount in here. We've got some drive shafts, so it's not a dog bone, they're more like a constant velocity shaft. It also came with a ball diff. It's got quite a nice smooth action ball diff, and a transmission, all plastic geared. We've got a slipper clutch, which this one has still fitted, and it would have had something called a hydro drive as well. See, we've got the stickers for it here. So that was actually a fluid filled device that went over the top of the spur gear. I believe I took it off of this because I think one of the little plastic screws on it got over tightened and it started leaking. To be honest, I never really noticed not having it on there. There was quite a thing made about it at the time, about how great it was over bumpy terrain to sort of smooth out the drive. But the buggy performed really well. Apart from that, the buggy is pretty standard. The only thing you ever really needed to do to these were the turnbuckles, or the steering links, whatever you want to call them. So in the kit it would come with some blackened steel ones, which were quite prone to snapping. So you know, if you took a bit of a tough tumble, they would tend to shear off. So what you do is you buy a titanium turnbuckle kit. So I've got them on the front and then also on the back. And literally that is the only upgrade I had to do to this. Apart from the fact we messed about with the shock weights, the oil weights and the springs. I don't think these are the original kit ones, because as this is an American buggy, it's very much set up for sort of dirt track racing when you buy them. So I think in the United States of America you've got a lot of sort of clay tracks, indoors and outdoors, which were very popular. In the UK, definitely back in the 1990s, we'd have been racing on grass, so we ran a very different setup. In fact, these tyres here are the original kit tyres on the front. Probably wouldn't have raced with those. I've just put them on here to bash about with, and I've got some spikes on the back. These don't fit the rims particularly brilliantly. I think this was a later set of tyres I bought. Probably did race on them, but typically you'd have gone for something like a mini spike back and probably a mini spike or a pin front. Sometimes we'd trim the outer edge. If the grass was a bit long, it would tend to grip roll a bit too easy, but you wouldn't generally get a lot of grip with just a rib front tyre on grass. One thing I really like about the Losi vehicles of this era were the shock absorbers. So the aluminium tube is actually one piece, they haven't got a separate cap at the top. That's all just machined as part of the body, and you actually fill them from the bottom where the piston rod goes in, and then the cap screws in there, so it's a plastic cap. So you've never had any issue with these sort of popping the caps open or leaking. In fact, I've never had a Losi shock leak on me at all. They've always been really smooth operation. I don't know if anybody builds shocks quite like this anymore, but they were quite a nice design back in the day. In terms of wheel fitment, one thing to remember, being again an American buggy, this is all imperial. So if you've got your sort of standard little hex wrench or spanner, whatever you want to call it, that comes with like lots of kits and Tamiya kits, you'll find that actually it doesn't fit. Nothing works on this buggy. You also find all of the Allen head screws. These are all imperial as well, so you need to have an imperial set, and the metric ones won't work or will just round stuff out. But this was a very popular buggy back in the day, so when we used to go racing with this, at least half the field would have been Losi buggies. Probably would have had a few associates there. Schumacher were quite popular as well, but on any given day you typically, oh, got a broken tyre there, we'll have to get some new tyres out. On any given day at least 50% of the field would have been the Losi buggy, but as you can see it's all pretty standard. So I've got quite a beefy front shock tower. Fingers crossed, I've never known anybody break any of these. It was possible to break this bulkhead here in the brace. It's only got a plastic brace, there was an upgrade for an aluminium brace. I think you could even get an aluminium bulkhead. But to be honest, the buggy was pretty tough, and this has been really well raced and bashed back in the day. Typically I'd run this on, well, in the latter racing days I used to run a LRP 10x6 motor in it, brushed motor. Although for most of its career it probably had something like a 12 triple in it. One thing you do find is you've got lots of these little E-clips, so they were a bit prone to popping off occasionally, pain, but generally it wasn't a major problem. But in terms of handling and setup, once you sort of got it set up, these buggies performed really well. Just a really nice stable buggy to race. You've got good steering in there. It's got anti-Ackerman, so you get quite a good equal turning lock on it all. A little bit fiddly if you need to get anything in there and replace it. But on the second hand one of these I had originally, somebody had rounded out both of these screw fittings here into the chassis, which was a shame. So the chassis is actually just a plastic shallow tub. I believe in North America they used to call it stiff as hell, but in the UK I think it was branded as stiff as L. Although I don't really see that branding anywhere these days. There was a graphite upgrade you could get. In fact, you could replace most of these parts with graphite, and there was even a Kinwald edition later in the buggy's life, which was basically the same buggy just with all the graphite updates on it. As you can see today, we've got something a little bit more modern in here. It is just a very budget, and I mean really budget, brushless waterproof ESC that came with a 3650 motor, so it's essentially a 540 motor, 5200 kV, which I think puts it at around 8.5 turns. Bit of a weird motor this. It's got quite a fat shaft on the motor, and not all of my pinion gears fit it. But it's 48 dp for the spur gear and the pinion gear. I have got a reasonable sized pinion gear on here. I think I'm running about 22th pinion. Although back in the day racing I would probably have been down, especially with a 10 turn motor, maybe down on a 15 tooth pinion. And back in the day we would also have been on even NiCad or nickel metal hydride. So I've got a nice battery tray, which as you can see works quite well with a modern lithium ion pack as well. And you could take a foam out there, so I think you could, no, I think these would only take 6 cell. The longer chassis trucks you could get a 7 cell pack in if you wanted. If you wanted to run 7 cells in one of these you'd have to be a little bit creative, or you could indeed run it as a saddle pack, you know, with the batteries sort of lined up rather than having them in parallel. We've got a modern receiver, still got the original antenna tube even though we've got a short aerial in there now. And the only other real addition is I've obviously fitted a U-Beck here as well. So this is an older servo. This is a KO Propo, I think it's a 2015 PS. So it's a pretty fast little servo, even by modern standards. Not the highest torque rating, but it's a good little servo. And in the old days you would have had a blue wire that came out of the ESC that you'd then connect into your servo, but we've got the U-Beck here to supply power to it. But we'll see it running. We'll do a little bit of a running video. I don't tend to bash this so much these days. Parts are quite hard to get for them. You know, if I was to end up breaking a suspension arm or something, or a shock tower, which I say these are all original. I've never broken any of them in the nearly 30 years that I've had the buggy and been using it. But obviously with a limited parts supply, it's something you do want to be a bit wary of these days. Anyway, it's probably one of the best buggies I've owned and driven. It was very tunable. You know, we could carpet race them as well. You can set them up for Astro. Obviously running that old configuration of having the motor out the back, but on grass tracks that probably is still a good thing, rather than having the mid-mounted ones and using the shorty lipo packs. And it was just really adjustable. I mean, as you can see, we've got 25-degree caster blocks in there, so you could adjust those. You could adjust the top links. We've got suspension adjustment. You know, it was a very configurable buggy. We could change the position on the rear links as well. You can just see down in there, hopefully. So you could really tailor it to your driving style and to the surface you're on. But as I say, it just handles really well. Once you kind of got it dialed in, got it on the right tyres for the surface, you didn't really need to do too much with it. It just worked. Very enjoyable buggy to drive. And say this one has been bashed. I think it's more mud than anything under there now, rather than big dangerous scratches. But you know, it's certainly done some big air time as well. I do remember going off many years ago and jumping off a big gravel mound. So it was coming off at least the height of a car in the air and landing on the deck, which I know is nothing these days, but certainly back in the 1990s that isn't typically what we did with these kinds of vehicles, but it stood up to it. So if you're interested in older Losi vehicles or older RC cars, the XX CR's on that sort of middle age where it's not quite vintage. I don't expect to see a re of this anytime soon, but it is a pretty cool little buggy that's actually probably pretty modern in many ways. Apart from the motor placement, I bet it would still give quite a lot of new stuff a run for its money in the right hands. Hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe.